morning, everyone. As ma'am just now mentioned, I work with the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, both the Teri University and Hyderabad University, and Dr. Radu and Dr. Chaudhary in particular, for inviting me to this conference. See, I think my paper presentation was more apt for the yesterday, but for some reason I could not attend yesterday. So I was kindly fitted in today's session. I will try to give you a macro perspective of both water situation in urban areas in India, and prior to that I'll talk about urbanization, how urbanization demands for water and how India is really striving to provide water to all its citizens, particularly in urban areas, and what are the urban challenges. Stop me in case if you think I'm going too fast, you do not understand, please do not hesitate to raise your hand and clarify the issues. I'll speak on the pattern of urbanization, basically from the 2011 census data, state of water delivery. This also is based on census 2011 and the NSSO rounds on water. The latest is 2012, the 69th round. Water-related reforms under the urban missions that date back to 2005 when the Elimination was launched. Achievement under the new Amrit mission and the way ahead. When we look at patterns of urbanization, we should also clarify ourselves regarding the concept of urban. What is an urban area? In India, urban area is defined in two ways. First, the statutory towns. As we know, that urban development is a state subject. So we have the statutory town, which the states define, and they decide on a number of statutory towns. It may be a corporation, a municipality, a cantonment, a notified area, or maybe other types of industrial committees as well. And also the census decides when three criteria are fulfilled at a time: a minimum of 5,000 population, a density of 400 persons per square kilometer, and 3/4 of male workforce in non-agriculture. These are basically called census towns. So when we look at the census versus statutory towns, the main difference is statutory towns are under the Ministry of Urban Development, be it at the center or at the state, whereas census towns, although they satisfy the census criterion, but they do not fall under the Ministry of Urban Development. Even at the state level, they are under rural governance. So here, the dynamics is totally different from the statutory towns. And we also find there is a strong interdependence between urbanization and per capita income in cities. And over time, this I plotted level of urbanization with per capita income in 2001. The relationship had strengthened in 2011. And the urban share of GDP is rising. The latest figures we have of 2009-10 from the Planning Commission, which mentions about 62.5% of the GDP is contributed by the urban areas. Well, generally people say, whenever you go to a conference or you read a research article, you find that it starts by saying India is rapidly urbanizing, which is actually not true. India rapidly urbanized only last in the 80s, and since then there has been a decline in the rate of urbanization. Although in absolute terms our population is increasing because we have a large base, but if you look at the rate of growth since the 80s, there has been a decline. And only in the last decade we find an increase of 0.02% from 2.74 to 2.76. And this 0.02% is accounted by census towns, right? because in the last decade, 2,530 new census towns were added. So just prior to the release of the census reports, 2011, various committees and agencies did estimate urban population, which was around 30%, and we found Indian level of urbanization to be 31.2%, and this is basically because of the growth of census towns. In 2011, we had 377 million people living in urban areas, which is the second largest urban community, and various international and national agencies do project India to urbanize very rapidly in the next few decades, and about 400 million people are to be added by 2050. And in order to sustain the current economic growth and the future, we need basic amenities, and water is one of the most important inputs to urban areas. This is how India looks when we look at the level of urbanization. The most urbanized states are in western and southern India. We have a top-heavy urban structure, which means that about 70% of the population are concentrated in class 1 towns, cities, which really means that cities with a population of 100,000 population have 70% of the urban population. This slide basically looks at the projections. Various organizations have projected in various manners, but in general, the agencies, they mentioned that about 50% level of urbanization is to rise to the level of 50% by 2050, and 75% of the GDPs would be generated in urban areas. And the number of million plus cities, which are as of now 52, the HPEC committee has projected it will rise to 87. So the demand for water will really increase in leaps and bounds. This is how India looked in 1951 with very few urban centers. Now we look in like this, and by 2031, India would look like this. The large cities growing larger and new urban centers coming up. So here, this I have already mentioned, and tried to explain that in the last decade, 2011 census reports, we found that there was an increase of only 242 statutory towns, whereas census towns really grew in leaps and bounds. As I have mentioned, that we have witnessed a slowing down in the rate of urban population, although there was an impressive urban growth in terms of GDP, which was 8.5 to 9%, and the census towns have thrown up a large number of urban challenges, and in this existing statutory towns, we find a process of sanitization and formalization. We are not allowing the poor to enter the cities. It's not that there's some policeman at the entry, but the cost of living is so high, which means housing, basic amenities including water, that the poor are unable to find a foothold. If you look at the NSSO migration tables, the latest 2007-8, we find it is the educated and the literate who are really finding a foothold in the urban areas, but the poor people, they do come, get absorbed in various informal activities. The males, at times, they are able to stay back, but the females are not absorbed in the urban economy, and the condition of their living is really poor, and their access to water is limited. I will explain in the next few slides. And in India, we also find there has been an increasing trend of peripheralization, which really means population within the cities are not increasing very fast. It's basically happening outside the city boundary, where we find degenerated peripheralization, because there the municipal corporation do not provide water, do not provide shelter, do not provide sewerage. And this pattern is there, we find this pattern in both million plus cities as well as in class 1 towns. I was working for the state of Kerala for the planning board, where we prepared the perspective plan for the next 20 years, where we found that Kerala, although the rate of urbanization really increased in the last decade, it's the most urbanized state, 47.78%. It increased from 25, just more or less doubled. But when you look at the urban centers, there has been depopulation in all the 7, right? But when you look at the urban agglomeration, taking the periphery, the population has increased tremendously. And when you look at the towns per se, you find that the core consists of only 10%. In 2 cities, people call them cities because they are part of urban agglomeration million plus, Malappuram and Kannur. But actually, the core city is less than 1 lakh population. So in many of the cities, you find that less than 50% of the population is living in the core city, where you have access to water provided by the municipal corporation, and 90% in cities like Malappuram and Kannur, 90% of the city is not served by the local body. When we look at the state of water delivery in the country, we find that coverage has improved over time, but this is not with regard to water provided by taps, right? There, in the last 20 years, there has been an improvement of only 2%. And the developed states show higher coverage with basic amenities, including water. And if you look at the city-wise distribution, here again, the big cities are better provided, and the coverage declines in smaller towns. And why is it so? The basic reason is revenue generation. The big cities, they have a robust economy and they are able to generate resources, whereas the small towns do not. And also the poor in cities, they pay more for the same service. Here I tried to plot the percentage of households with access to tap water across different size class of towns and cities, where we find the big cities, they have higher coverage. Same with safe drinking water within the premises, percentage of households with bathroom within the house, no drainage. You see, as the size class of towns go down, the smaller the size class, the lesser the number of households having access to drainage. The HPC in 2010, the high-powered expert committee on infrastructure investment, they had estimated about 40 lakh crores investment to be done by the government in order to improve the water and other basic amenities in the country. And if we look at water per se, water, sewerage, solid waste management, it's 20% of the total investment required. This includes both capital as well as operation and maintenance of water services. This is what I was referring to, the NSSO unit level data, which I tried to put together for 2002 and 2012, the 58 and the 69 rounds of the NSSO. I'll quickly go to the results. Here we find, when we look at the slum and non-slum households by principal source of drinking water, we find that the share of households covered with tap water has declined for all urban, slums and non-slums. And the decline has been sharper in squatter settlements. What are squatter settlements? Where there are households in informal areas, 20 or less as defined by the NSSO, where the quality of living is really poor. And in the latest round of the NSSO, we also find there has been an addition of another source of drinking water, which is the bottled water. An addition of households using bottled water to those with taps, if you add, suppose you think that maybe because new system has come up where many of the households who can afford are using bottled water. And if you add up bottled water to tap water, even then you do not find that the level of services, water service has improved over time, over the last 10 years. When you look at slum and non-slum households by principal source of drinking water across different size classes, we find the share of households with access to tap and water is much higher in big cities, in both slums and non-slums. Whereas in the small towns, what do we find? There has been a greater dependence on groundwater. When you look at the distance to fetch water by slums and non-slum households, we find that the share of households with principal source of water within premises is almost half in slums as compared to non-slums. And among slums, the improvement has happened only for the notified slums, notified and non-notified, but not for the squatters, where there has been a decline. The bathroom facilities also report a similar trend. I have added Good morning, everyone. As ma'am just now mentioned, I work with the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, both the Teri University and Hyderabad University, and Dr. Radu and Dr. Chaudhary in particular for inviting me to this conference. See, I think my paper presentation was more apt for the Good morning, everyone. As ma'am just now mentioned, I work with the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, both the Teri University and Hyderabad University, and Dr. Radu and Dr. Chaudhary in particular for inviting me to this conference. See, I think my paper presentation was more apt for the yesterday, but for some reason I could not attend yesterday. So I was kindly fitted in today's session. I will try to give you a macro perspective of both water situation in urban areas in India, and prior to that I'll talk about urbanization, how urbanization demands for water and how India is really striving to provide water to all its citizens, particularly in urban areas, and what are the urban challenges. Stop me in case if you think I'm going too fast, you do not understand, please do not hesitate to raise your hand and clarify the issues. I'll speak on the pattern of urbanization, basically from the 2011 census data, state of water delivery. This also is based on census 2011 and the NSSO rounds on water. The latest is 2012, the 69th round. Water-related reforms under the urban missions that date back to 2005 when the Elimination was launched. Achievement under the new Amrit mission and the way ahead. When we look at patterns of urbanization, we should also clarify ourselves regarding the concept of urban. What is an urban area? In India, urban area is defined in two ways. First, the statutory towns. As we know, that urban development is a state subject. So we have the statutory town, which the states define, and they decide on number of statutory towns. It may be a corporation, a municipality, a cantonment, a notified area, or maybe other types of industrial committees as well. And also the census decides when 3 criteria are fulfilled at a time: a minimum of 5,000 population, a density of 400 persons per square kilometer, and 3/4 of male workforce in non-agriculture. These are basically called census towns. So when we look at the census versus statutory towns, the main difference is statutory towns are under the Ministry of Urban Development, be it at the center or at the state, whereas census towns, although they satisfy the census criterion, but they do not fall under the Ministry of Urban Development. Even at the state level, they are under rural governance. So here, the dynamics is totally different from the statutory towns. And we also find there is a strong interdependence between urbanization and per capita income in cities. And over time, this I plotted level of urbanization with per capita income in 2001. The relationship had strengthened in 2011. And the urban share of GDP is rising. The latest figures we have of 2009-10 from the Planning Commission, which mentions about 62.5% of the GDP is contributed by the urban areas. Well, generally people say, whenever you go to a conference or you read a research article, you find that it starts by saying India is rapidly urbanizing, which is actually not true. India rapidly urbanized only last in the 80s, and since then there has been a decline in the rate of urbanization. Although in absolute terms our population is increasing because we have a large base, but if you look at the rate of growth since the 80s, there has been a decline. And only in the last decade we find an increase of 0.02% from 2.74 to 2.76. And this 0.02% is accounted by census towns, right? Because in the last decade, 2,530 new census towns were added. The requirements other than Jabalpur. Yeah, only 4 cities have metered connections. Quality of water is much below the benchmark in all cities. Collection efficiency is also poor. Existing coverage of network services is also very poor. Many of the cities do not have at all. There is also a lack of treatment capacity in most of the cities. So, in conclusion, I would like to just mention a few of the issues in water management in urban areas. There has been significant investments, but coverage through piped connections still remains low. Few cities are able to provide 24/7 water supply. Inequities do exist, and there are high levels of non-revenue water, which indicate there is a scope for immediate improvement in the network efficiency. Consumer level metering is still low. Cost recovery levels are currently low across cities, although big cities fare better compared to the smaller ones. And there are no standard protocols for water quality monitoring. Current systems are really irregular, and there is no third-party validation. What we need is capacity building and advocacy in bringing about acceptance of consumers in water metering, because until and unless we have revenues, we cannot improve the quality of the services. And improvement could also be brought out through initiatives such as energy audits, which is one of the reforms. Energy and water audit has been started under Amrut. Reduction in non-revenue water and improved billing system. Debt management practices of urban local bodies and collection of areas should also be improved, and there is significant room for improvement in the water quality monitoring. Identification of repairs that is to be done by the local bodies. Illegal connections are there in most of the cities, which should, I am not saying that poor should not be provided water, but illegal connections should be stopped, or there should be billing for the connections. And rainwater harvesting and reuse of recycled water, which was already there, should be improved in order to provide water to all urban citizens. Thank you for your attention.